Well, here we are. We have reached the end of the third Dark Souls game, and in doing so, we have completed our side quest. Now all that's left is to try to figure out what the heck was happening in this game, and oh, have I tried. Piecing together the loose mythology of this world has always been a core part of the Souls experience, so upon completing the game, I immediately jumped right into my traditional lore dive. I read wikis and subreddits and watched an unhealthy number of YouTube videos just trying to wrap my head around the general consensus understanding of Dark Souls 3's story. And I think I have. Maybe. So today, to send this side quest off into the creepy sunset, let's retrace our steps through Dark Souls 3 and try to piece together everything that happened around us. But first, a few important things to mention. 1. This video will be dense with spoilers, not just for Dark Souls 3, but for the entire trilogy. I figure you probably knew what you were getting into when you clicked on this video, but just in case. 2. If you are a Dark Souls veteran, you probably already know this stuff, and probably better than I do, so apologies for anything I get wrong. But then again, if I do get something wrong, I'm not gonna feel too bad about it because 3. To be frank, connecting the dots in Dark Souls 3 is more challenging than ever before. Piecing this story together is gonna require a hefty dose of speculation, guesswork, possibly even a dash of headcanon. And I would not be at all surprised if some of you connect these story dots to form a very different picture from the one I'm about to paint. But that's okay, it's kinda what Dark Souls is all about. And I must stress that 4. None of the story details I'm about to share in this video are some new revelation. These lore observations come to you largely thanks to the tireless work of the dedicated Souls community that has already dug up and compiled all of this information. Particular thanks go to VaatiVidya, Jerks on Frontier, MadLuigi, the Bonfireside Chat podcast, and the editors of all of those wiki pages. I have put a link to all of these in the description below, and I highly recommend exploring them yourself, because there is no way I'm going to cover even half of this game's story content in just one video. Just know that if you're still feeling hungry for Souls lore after this video is over, you have got an abundance of options. Anyway, let's get to it. At the end of Dark Souls, we were faced with a choice. Do we sacrifice ourselves to link the flame and extend Gwyn's Age of Fire? Or do we let that flame die and usher in the Age of Dark, which Gwyn fought so hard to delay? Ultimately, we linked the fire, and at the time that decision carried such a feeling of finality. We had succeeded where countless others had failed, and even though the fire would surely die someday, our choice to revive this age still carried a sense of satisfying conclusion. But then Dark Souls 2 revealed the lie. There had been nothing final about our sacrifice. Gwyn's artificially extended Age of Fire had disrupted the world's natural order, and we were but the first of many sacrificed to keep that fire lit. The world was stuck in a loop of fading fire, the undead curse forever driving humanity into the flames. And though we would once again resign ourselves to that same fate, a question lingered in the air. Was this our only choice? If we were to refuse to inherit the order of this world, to reclaim the future Gwyn had stolen, what might await us there? Ages have passed, and this cycle of rekindling has been repeated countless times. In the kingdom of Lothric, preservation of the fire has become ritual. The curse, the shrine, the firekeeper, the kiln. Each component of the process is accounted for, and countless heirs have been raised up just to be fed to that flame. But then, one day, an heir refused. The Lord meant to link the fire chose instead to watch the flame fade. There were fail-safes in place for this eventuality. As the fire began to diminish, a bell tolled, and the Lords of Cinder were revived. Powerful beings who had successfully linked the flame in ages past. If 5 of them were to join together and take their thrones one more time, their lingering cinders would be enough to kindle the fire again and prevent disaster. Alas, only one lord showed up to fulfill their role. The rest of the Lords of Cinder abandoned their thrones. It would seem that, for one reason or another, these lords had no interest in making that sacrifice a second time. The curse ran rampant, and panic set in. Civil war broke out within Lothric's walls. The land itself began to buckle and fold as all of the Lord's realms began to converge upon the city. And in the midst of this chaos, a horde of pilgrims appeared on the horizon, hollows from the mysterious kingdom of Londor, slowly making their way to Lothric's gates. The fire is nearly out. The sun itself begins to dim, and one last failsafe is deployed. The bell rings again over Firelink Shrine, and nearby, in the Cemetery of Ash, the unkindled rise from their graves, born of the ash of countless undead sacrifices. The unkindled are the remains of those who once attempted to link the fire, but failed. Now reborn, we have only one role: to find those Lords of Cinder who have abandoned their duty, and to return them to their thrones by any means necessary. Thus begins the story of the Ashen One. After awakening in the cemetery, we make our way to Firelink Shrine. We are tested at the gates by an abyss-corrupted knight from some previous cycle, but we survive, claiming the coiled sword that was sheathed in his body and using it to reignite the shrine's dormant bonfire. We find a number of friendly faces in this safe haven. Andre, the blacksmith who appears to still be alive and enjoying his work millennia later. Hawkwood, another Ashen warrior who is feeling incredibly crestfallen about this daunting task we unkindled have been given. The Shrine Handmaid, a familiar-looking old woman who looks after the shrine and keeps us equipped. Ludleth of Corland, the only Lord of Cinder to willingly return to his throne. And, of course, the Firekeeper, who tends to the bonfire and gives us our mission. Find the Lords of Cinder and deliver them here. And so our hunt begins. Our first target? Artorius the Abyss Watcher left quite an impression, and it's not entirely surprising that his legacy has developed a devoted fandom in-universe as well. They know him only as the Wolf-Blood Master, but even so, the Abyss Watchers have shaped themselves in Artorius' image. An order of Farron Knights, the Abyss Watchers sought out the Abyss wherever it sprang up and crushed it. Even a hint of exposure to the Abyss was cause enough for total eradication. If you saw these helmets marching on your town, you did not have much time left. As a sacred rite, every Abyss Watcher imbibes the blood of the wolf. They are linked to each other by the blood. And so when they linked the fire, they did so together as one, a collective sharing the blood of the wolf they so revere. Hawkwood was one of them once, a failure, a deserter, unfit to link the fire alongside his brothers. It's no wonder he feels so crestfallen now. A worthless unkindled, revived to fight legends, an order he was unworthy to join? What a sick joke. The realm of Farron stands upon soil that was once called Darkroot, and Ulasil before that. It's little more than a reeking swamp now, all those old walls and towers sinking into the poisonous bog. The Farron Keep sits over the old catacombs of Karthus, an ancient city that fell to the Abyss and was no doubt laid low by the Abyss Watchers. It may have been the last Abyss-fallen realm that these warriors managed to eradicate. Even now, this keep stifles the lingering presence of the Abyss below. But such prolonged proximity to that furious, burning darkness takes a toll. It's clear that the Abyss Watchers never learned the true fate of their hero. How, in reality, Artorius failed to quell the Abyss in Ulasil. How he was corrupted and claimed by it. How a chosen undead, the first heir of fire, put him down and finished his job. Falling to the Abyss was Artorius' true fate, and it seems poetically fitting that the Abyss Watchers eventually succumbed to the same tragic corruption. We find the Watchers still in their keep, their minds consumed, standing over the corpses of their kin. They see the Abyss in each other now, and attack with the same ferocious zealotry they once unleashed on Karthus below, locked in a stalemate struggle to the end of time. Fighting, dying, reviving, fighting again. Theirs is the first pile of cinders we return to their throne. That's one down. Next up, Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, was a cleric once, but his ascension to lordship had little to do with piety. At some point, he developed a habit of eating men. The consumption of so many souls made him powerful, and he quickly asserted control over his order of clerics, founding the Church of the Deep. We don't know much about the Deep, other than that it's a form of still, stagnant darkness beyond comprehension, deeper than humanity, the place to which humanity's dregs ultimately sink. Aldrich encouraged his fellow clerics to join in his cannibalistic habit, and eventually indulged in it so much himself that he bloated and then softened into a sludge. But still so powerful was he that when the time came for someone to link the fire, his order made him into a lord, sacrificing him to the flame. Now that he is revived, the Cathedral of the Deep seems the best place to start our search. We stumble upon Aldrich's trail as early as the undead settlement. The Church of the Deep has a strong presence here, with evangelists gathering the village's inhabitants and sending these new followers towards the cathedral. Fresh human sacrifices for Aldrich and his order. We follow the trail down that road of sacrifices toward the cathedral itself, and we stumble upon two other knights walking that same road, fellow unkindled, Henri and Horace. These two have a history with Aldrich, back before his ascent to lordship. As children, Henri and Horace escaped the Cathedral of the Deep, the only two known to have successfully evaded sacrifice to the cannibal cleric. Now Aldrich is revived, these two unkindled have taken it upon themselves to hunt him down. We soon find that Aldrich's cathedral continues to thrive. The deacons of the Deep stand guard over his coffin, but upon defeating them we see that Aldrich is nowhere to be found. Inside the coffin we find only a small silver doll. Listen carefully and you can hear the doll whisper, "Wherever you go, the moon still sets in Irithyll. Wherever you may be, Irithyll is your home." These dolls are given by Pontiff Sullivan to his most valued subjects, as they grant access to Irithyll in the Boreal Valley, a city bathed in snow and cool moonlight. It would appear that this is where Aldrich's trail leads next. Henri makes it to Irithyll too, but his companion has already succumbed to the curse, so he arrives alone. In another life, another reality, Henri might have made it all the way to Aldrich himself, but it wouldn't happen here. And perhaps for the best, for Aldrich has ascended far beyond the mere cannibalistic cleric Henri escaped as a child. Once resurrected, Aldrich had spent time in contemplation. Gwen's age of fire, he decided, no longer concerned him. No, he was now obsessed with a different age he saw in visions, the age of the deep sea. Get it? Because Aldrich sounds like Eldritch, and the deep sea it's a Lovecraft thing, and forget it. Anyway, Aldrich chose a new path for himself, and the only way he could see to reaching that new reality was to grow more powerful still. Consumption of man would no longer suffice. He must consume gods. And it so happened that his ally, Sullivan, ruler of Irithyll and what remained of Honorlando, knew where to find some. When we finally ascend to darkened Honorlando ourselves and set foot in that familiar cathedral, we lay eyes on Aldrich. Even now he is consuming Gwendolyn, the last child of Gwyn to remain in the city of the gods. Who knows how many others Sullivan might have served up to this monstrous Lord of Cinder. But no more will suffer this fate. We put the devourer of gods down for good, and set his rotten ashes upon the throne where they belong. That's 2 down. Not much is known of Yorm's history. He assumed the throne over a people begging for leadership, but he never truly gained their respect. Giants have rarely been treated well in the world of Dark Souls. Used, buried, experimented upon, enslaved. Even after assuming the role of king, Yorm was mocked by his people. Yet still he strove to earn the respect he was due. Not only did he continually fight to defend his subject, but he gave to them a gift, a sword meant to slay giants. If they really, truly wanted him gone, they need only act. He gave another of these blades to a dear friend, a safety measure, should the time come that Yorm needed to be put down. Despite everything, he put great faith in his people. Even the circumstances of Yorm's ascension to lordship are shrouded in mystery. It's known that at some point, a great power emerged in Yorm's homeland, the profaned flame. an unnatural fire that could not be extinguished, one that twisted and corrupted souls in its presence. Yorm chose to link Gwen's fire himself in hopes of putting an end to this profaned flame, but his efforts backfired horrifically. A blazing inferno swept through his homeland, incinerating human flesh and nothing else. The people he served were extinguished in an instant. When the bell rang and Yorm's cinders were revived, the giant looked upon the remains of his kingdom, the charred corpses of his people, and was crestfallen. The fire had betrayed him. Everything he had fought so hard to protect, Gwen's cursed flame had taken away. And so, Yorm returned to his old throne room and sat, apathetic and alone. Numerous times along our journey, we encounter a fellow unkindled named Sigvard, a bumbling onion knight from Katarina with a jolly disposition. We share battles and hearty toasts with this new companion, but he speaks in vague and uncharacteristically solemn terms of some duty he must perform in the profaned capital, a grave promise he must keep. It's not until we do finally reach the profaned capital and set foot in Yorm's throne room that we learn the true nature of that promise. Sigvard stands at our side, wielding a sword meant to slay giants, the one Yorm entrusted to his dear friend so long ago. Sigvard is prepared to use it now to fulfill the promise he once made to his companion, and with the Onion Knight's help, we return this Lord of Cinder's ashes to his rightful throne in Firelink. Our gathering of allies is beginning to diminish. Grey Rat, the despondent thief, lost to increasingly dangerous scavenging missions. Yol, the strange pilgrim of Londor, mysteriously dead after drawing out our true strength. Irina, the blind nun from Karim, finally succeeding in her goal of becoming a firekeeper, but at the cost of herself. She now sits, a lonely husk amongst the corpses of countless firekeepers from cycles past. Cirrus, dark moon warrior of the sunless realms, found dead after we help her put down her mad grandfather. Even our fellow unkindled dwindle in number. Sigvard is gone, his duty in the profaned capital fulfilled. We defeated Hawkwood ourselves when he challenged us for the twinkling dragon stone we held. Horus fell hollow and was subdued in the smoldering lake. Henri, well, we'll get to him. 4 Lords of Cinder are now gathered. Only one remains unaccounted for, and our time runs short. The sun is eclipsed over Lothric now, an enormous dark sign hanging overhead, drawing humanity up into the sky. The flame doesn't have much time left. Prince Lothric was born to link the fire, raised for it, practically engineered for the task. The Lothric royal family had been obsessed with producing the perfect heir, first through pure breeding, later through far more extreme and unconventional means. Despite all their effort, Lothric was born frail and sickly, but even so, he was raised to fulfill his role, to sit the throne, to be the next heir of fire. So when the time came for him to take that throne, the kingdom must have been very surprised when he refused. Prince Lothric rejected his duty, deciding instead to retreat to the high tower of his castle with his older brother Lorien and wait, watching from a distance as everything fades to nothing. It's difficult to determine why the prince made this decision, but we find clues to this story all over Lothric Castle. Even as we take our first steps along the kingdom's high wall, we see evidence of some conflict taking place outside the castle. At the castle entrance, we meet Emma, the high priestess of Lothric who once served as the prince's wet nurse. She would later implore us with her dying breath,
"Please save his soul. Tell him what he must be, a lord."
As we ascend the castle itself, we stumble upon a strange half-dragon creature, Osiris, former king of Lothric, now utterly consumed by an obsession with dragon blood and immortality, holding what may or may not be an invisible infant in his arms. Ocelot, child of dragons, he calls it. It would seem this mad king was the one behind the royal family's pursuit of a perfect heir, and now we see evidence of the kind of unconventional means of breeding that may have resulted in the prince's shriveled and sickly form. Behind the consumed king's room, we make yet another discovery. stumbling into a dark place frozen in time. A familiar shrine where the prince was once meant to fulfill his duty. But this Firelink shrine lies abandoned, shrouded in darkness. Higher still into the castle, we wander into the Grand Archives, the domain of Lothric's scholars. Rumor has it that the prince first began to reconsider his sacred duty after taking the guidance of some mentor, a skeptic among these scholars who doubted the linking of the flame. He certainly wouldn't be the first scholar to question this age of fire. At long last, we find Lothric at the top of his tower, accompanied by his older brother. The two have linked their souls together, though the joining has left Lorien mute and crippled by Lothric's cursed illness. The prince invites us to stay with him, to all sit and watch the world end together. But we have a role to fulfill. The lords must sit their thrones.
Mark my words, Ashen One. You remain among the accursed.
The Lords of Cinder are gathered, each placed upon their respective throne willingly or as a pile of ash. Everything is ready. But what happens from here all depends on what future we choose, and to understand the ramifications of that choice, we need to go back to where this started. In the time of Lordran, there were two primordial serpents, Frampt and Koth, who each tried to influence the path of the chosen undead. Frampt was allied with the family of Gwyn and tried to steer the chosen undead toward rekindling the flame. But Koth sought the end of Gwyn's Age of Fire, hoped to bring about an Age of Dark, to raise the chosen undead up as a new Dark Lord. Frampt would win the battle for the chosen undead, as she would go on to restore Gwyn's dying flame. But the serpents' war over the fire didn't end that day. If anything, it escalated. See, Gwen's greatest manipulation hadn't been teaching man to fear the dark, their own nature, but in providing them a structural means to fight the dark for him, the Way of White. Founded by gods, but championed by man, this religious order of clerics had made it their mission to kindle bonfires and preserve the gods' power. They instilled the fear of the dark into their fellow man, taught that the dark sign was a cursed brand, that the only way to fight against this curse was to keep the fires lit. Even after the fall of Lordran, it was prophecy and superstition that led so many undead to the lands of ancient lords in pursuit of the first flame.
There is an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know."
Man achieved their greatest triumphs through cooperation, it seemed, and the best way to incentivize that cooperation was to provide a cause and a structure. And it would seem that both serpents internalized this lesson, for they both set out to create just that. Frampt gathered Gwyn's surviving descendants and followers and led them to found a new nation, dedicated to the cycle of kindling above all else. Under Frampt's subtle guidance and supervision, Lothric grew into a flourishing kingdom, and they slowly refined the fire-kindling process into a clockwork ritual. Koth, too, oversaw the foundation of a kingdom, a realm for hollows and undead, one dedicated to mankind's natural state, a land for people who do not fear the dark. What's more, Londor established a sacred order of its own, the Sable Church. Led by 3 sisters dedicated to Koth's cause, the Sable Church stood as a mirror image to Gwyn's Way of White, an order dedicated to the extinguishing of the flame and the eradication of the false life it bestows. Alas, with the flame still being regularly kindled and defended in Lothric, there was little Londor could do but grow stronger and wait, quietly probing Lothric's defenses in anticipation of the day when a crack appeared. It would take many generations of waiting, but that opportunity would finally arrive, when one day, a young heir of fire rejected his throne. The prince's rejection of his duty threw Lothric into a state of chaos. Rejecting the kindling ritual was an act tantamount to treason, but the perpetrator was not only a member of the royal family, but a descendant of the gods of old. The kingdom's power structure fractured as Lothric's pillars of rule feuded over what should be done, and the nation collapsed into a full-blown civil war. As we wander through the aftermath, we encounter many knights, some clad in red, others in blue, most of them dead and scattered over Lothric's streets. It would appear that the knights in red are those who turned against the royal family and fought to preserve Lothric's traditional purpose, while the knights in blue chose loyalty to their prince. Indeed, once we venture beyond the Grand Archives, we encounter a significant number of them defending Lothric and Lorien's chamber. This civil war shredded Lothric's defenses from the inside, and as the first flame dwindled, the undead curse spread, weakening them further. Londor saw their chance, and the Sisters of the Sable Church went to work. In Lothric, we find the corpses of dozens of black-robed pilgrims with stones chained to their backs, and many other strange sights. Hollows which burst into violent, abyss-corrupted monstrosities, and others which have grown into strange white trees, reaching for the heavens, as if something within them was drawn out of their body in some way or another, toward the sky. In this final hour, as the first flame fades to nothing, is our humanity being drawn up into that vortex, pulled up and out of these hollowing vessels into the sky? This pus of man might be a similar phenomenon in a more violent form. We've seen what happens to the dark soul when it's agitated. And later, as we make our ascent up the castle, we see great wispy creatures drifting overhead. Their wings look notably similar to tree branches, still pointed upward, skyward. And closer inspection with modded cameras reveals more interesting details, a composition of what looks like flesh and bone, torsos looking like an open rib cage. The creatures are known as pilgrim butterflies. In the old days, the Way of White had a tradition for ridding themselves of any follower who turned undead. They would send the cursed member of their order to Lordran to venture down into the catacombs where it was rumored that the Rite of Kindling could be found. Should an undead Way of White follower retrieve this artifact, it would bring the Way of White even greater success in their mission of bonfire kindling. But if the undead should fail, well, at least the Order was rid of them. And I can't help but think that these Pilgrims of Londor are performing a similar function. Sent to Lothric in droves, with great stones on their back meant to hold their humanity in as they travel, allowing them to persist just long enough to reach their destination. Once there, they can spread the word of the Sable Church to the hollowing kingdom of Lothric, gain new converts, spread further dissent and confusion among its populace. They might even manage to influence someone in a position of power. But should they only manage to perish at Lothric's gates, well, at the very least, they might wreak havoc on Londor's enemies in death. The Dragon Slayer armor we encounter is but an empty suit, after all, controlled by the pilgrim butterflies overhead. Who knows what other chaos the remains of these pilgrims have inflicted on this struggling kingdom? In this light, the pilgrims seem like some sort of hybrid missionary and siege weapon, sent in droves to the enemy fortifications to stir up as much chaos as possible, weakening Lothric and making them vulnerable to the critical blow, which is where we come in. As we wander outside the city walls, we encounter a Londor pilgrim who has managed to survive, Yol. He is beyond excited to meet a champion of Ash, and he asks to join us. Once in our employ, he offers to draw out our true strength, granting us greater power, but also these mysterious dark sigils, black gaping holes in the flesh resembling the dark sign but from which humanity seeps. These sigils are hollowing us, literally draining the dark soul from the vessel that is our body. Once he has drawn all the strength from us he can, Yol mysteriously perishes, but we are then greeted by a new face, one of the Sisters of the Sable Church, Yuria. It would seem that she has found in us a champion, the one who will finally achieve Kath's great mission. She would have us bring Gwen's Age of Fire to an end at long last, and ascend to claim the role of Dark Lord. Our fellow Unkindled, Henri, is pulled into this plot, as Yuria has us meet him in Anor Londo for a twisted sort of wedding ceremony. It is indeed a form of joining. In performing this ceremony, we claim his dark sigils, enough of them to prepare us for the task ahead. Yuria urges us to go to the fire, as Lothric would have it. But when the time comes, she says, don't link the fire. Claim it. Wrest it from its mantle and make it ours. And in doing so, become the Lord of Hollows Londor has sought all of these years. It's not the Age of Dark as the world should have had, and it's not the mere extinguishing of flame. We are to take the fire, to seize an era of our own by force. We have our new orders. Our hunt for cinders is over, and thus we begin the ritual. The Lords of Cinder burn one last time to grant us the fire we'll need to kindle Gwen's dying flame. We are ready. We are sent to the kiln of the first flame to complete our mission, and it is here that we see an extraordinary glimpse of what the end of this world might look like. All the kingdoms of man and gods converged to one point, crumpling in over each other, folding, buckling, and collapsing. Everything we have built falling over the edge of the world. Upon reaching the kiln, we are greeted by one final opponent, the Soul of Cinder, an amalgamation of every soul to kindle the fire before us. We fight many heirs of fire that day, knights and clerics and mages and pyromancers, and finally, the last Soul of Cinder, the original Soul of Cinder, Gwyn, the one responsible for all of this. He who clung to his age of fire, who staved off the dark for as long as possible. He who committed the first sin and doomed man to follow in his footsteps for generations to come. He who subjugated us, who robbed us of our age to preserve his own. He who used us and has continued to use us long after his own demise. The Lord of Sunlight. Upon defeating this specter of Gwyn, we are once again faced with a choice. We could kindle this fire, the task our ashes were revived to perform, keeping the flame lit just a little bit longer. Or we could let the fire die out, finally allow the Age of Fire to end, embrace the dark that would follow. But no, we came here with other plans. Instead, we claim the fire, taking it within us. The darkness sets in, but on our terms. At long last, the Hollows will have their day. Mankind will have their day. Perhaps this is that pathless future Aldia once yearned to find, that future beyond the scope of light and beyond the reach of dark. Or perhaps this future we've claimed is just a new artificial age outside the natural order, another perversion of what should have been. But at least, for the first time, whatever awaits us, we venture into that future on our own terms. Dark Souls 3 presents some extremely compelling imagery and ideas, and as you can see, you can connect those dots in some pretty compelling ways, with some effort. That said, as any of you who have spent time exploring this game's lore already know, I have been taking some big speculative leaps. Dark Souls has always been a series which gives you a large collection of story dots and expects you to do the work to connect them. But with Dark Souls 3, those dots are further apart than ever before, and a lot of them don't really connect in any way that makes much sense. Indeed, there are some dots which feel like they should be connecting in an obvious way but aren't, and a lot of dots that seem to conflict with each other. They defy connecting, is what I'm saying. And on the one hand, that's to be expected. Leaving you with some lingering questions on the outer fringes of the story is what these games do. Who is Velka? Who was this lost sinner, really? Who is Rosaria? What the heck did happen to Ornstein? These are the kinds of questions that encourage you to spin up new theories and make the world of Dark Souls seem even larger than what the games explicitly show, and I am 100% on board for that. But then some of the particular questions Dark Souls 3 leaves hanging seem really important to getting a fundamental understanding of what is happening in this game, and that is a bit more frustrating. Like, okay, Ludlith of Corland. This guy seems fascinating. For one, he appears to be an actual pygmy, which is a huge deal. We had never met one before this. He's also a Lord of Cinder, and there are lots of subtle hints to suggest that the story of his particular ascent to lordship is really unusual in some significant ways. For one, he knows about the untended graves, that dark duplicate of our Firelink shrine. He knows about the Firekeeper's eyes we find there, and what they do. Good luck figuring him out, though. I have yet to find one theory that feels satisfyingly conclusive. And what is going on with the untended graves? We stumble upon a few different versions of Firelink Shrine in our adventure, but this is the only one that's actually physically connected to the Lothric we spend the game exploring, which would suggest that it's somehow the real one in a way that ours isn't. Most evidence seems to suggest that it's a version of Firelink stuck further back in the past, but a few stray details seem to suggest that it could be the future? And what does this make our version of Firelink Shrine then? Any player messages left in our home Firelink also appear in this one, so they are certainly connected in some way. It is just baffling. Oh, and then there's the angels. There's this whole side plot with Lothric's civil war involving angels that is super underdeveloped. All we really know is that at some point, a woman named Gertrude, who was one of Queen Lothric's handmaidens and possibly her daughter, was visited by an angel, and this apparently led to a huge schism that played a big role in the Civil War. It would seem that the teachings of the angels were declared heresy by all the pillars of Lothric, but some, like these wing knights here, embraced it. And there are tons of theories about who Gertrude is, what happened to her, where she went, but there is just so little compelling evidence to build a solid story around, which is really frustrating because it seems like it's supposed to be this bombshell that blows the whole Lothric story wide open, especially when you consider that we do see angels ourselves in the DLC over the Dreagheap. And what's more, they kind of appear to be the final evolution of Londor's pilgrim butterflies, which would suggest that Londor might have been responsible for that angel visiting Gertrude and starting the whole schism. But there are so few conclusive details to be found anywhere that the whole story thread just feels undercooked. And don't even get me started on the profaned flame. It's not the first flame, and it seems to be something entirely different from the Chaos Flame of Izalith because that one's burning out, which is why we're seeing all of these dying and dead demons everywhere. So this flame seems like some new third thing, and one that's kind of important to understanding Yorm's story, and also probably Pontiff Sullivan's.
Gives me conniptions.
On a lore front, there are many plot elements in Dark Souls 3 that feel frustratingly underbaked for a lot of reasons. But that said, looking back, I really do enjoy the arc of this trilogy as a whole. I love the way our understanding of Gwyn evolves from game to game. He starts out as this god figure, the deity who wrought everything that lays before us, a great being whose works fell to ruin despite everything he sacrificed. But then, the further in the series we get, the less admirable his actions look. The more we learn, the more he is revealed as a tyrant, clinging to what he's built. And more than that, afraid of the threat we pose to him. And as we slowly come to understand the full breadth of Gwyn's treatment of our kind, the more villainous he's revealed to be. And Solaire, poor little Solaire. I sympathize with those who were disappointed to learn that he is not in fact the long-lost son of Gwyn, but what we're left with in the wake of the Nameless King's reveal, I actually still rather like. He's not a fallen god or a lost son, he's a true believer. A jolly knight who wants nothing more than the glory of being the chosen undead. The hero who will follow in Gwyn's footsteps and rekindle his lord's Age of Fire. Not that unlike us our first time through the game, really. And though his longing for that glory led him to tragedy in this playthrough, knowing what I do now, I like his other possible fate even better. In keeping him alive long enough to reach the kiln, you allow him to perform the duty he desired more than anything. It may be a hollow glory, knowing what we do now, but it's a glory he wanted. And I love Dark Souls 2's place in this series even more now. I see a lot of people casually dismissing it in the wake of Dark Souls 3, since there aren't a whole lot of direct plot links leading from one to the next, but I love how much larger it makes this world feel. Dark Souls 3 pulls directly from the first game so frequently that I'm glad we got a chance to see that there was more world out there. Besides, in the larger series arc, Dark Souls 2 represents that crucial turning point. It's the entry that pulled back the curtain on what linking the fire in Dark Souls 1 actually meant. I went into Dark Souls 3 with a very different perspective on Dark Souls 1's events thanks to that middle game, and I am so glad I didn't skip it. Plus, I love how where Dark Souls 1 and 3 are driven by the mythology of the old gods and the aftermath of their stories, Dark Souls 2 places its focus squarely on humanity just trying to deal with the hand they've been dealt, on the people still playing this cycle out long after Gwen's name has been forgotten, on the human kings who faced the rise of that same undead curse and the different ways they futilely tried to fight it, on all the small comforts those cursed souls of Drang Lake find in a peaceful settlement like Majula, on all of the personal miseries this undead curse inflicts, how you forget yourself, your loved ones, your purpose, and are left empty. Lucatiel's story alone adds so much to my understanding of what hollowing feels like that I can't imagine experiencing Dark Souls without this middle chapter. Even more though, I love the way our understanding of linking the fire and what that actually means evolves with each new game. When we first learn of it, it seems like our salvation, like the thing that will save us from this undead curse, and maybe reverse the decay this world is suffering, if only for a while. A noble cause worth fighting for. But then Dark Souls 2 comes in and introduces doubt. Maybe we had it wrong. Maybe this age of fire we've been suffering and dying in an endless loop to preserve was never in our best interest. Maybe that age of dark we've been fearing all this time wasn't something we were protected from, but something that was taken from us. And if so, might there be some way to break this cycle somehow? And then, by Dark Souls 3, doubt turns to certainty, as we see the stagnation this endless cycle has wrought. It's never been a cycle, really, but a spiral. It was always going to end, and now we get a glimpse of what that end looks like. Playing these games has been one of the most rewarding gaming experiences I've ever had, and I'm grateful all of you folks came along on that ride with me. It has been a pleasure. But before we end this, we have one last story. Even from the beginning, Gwyn used the Children of the Dark Soul to his own ends. When he challenged the ancient dragons to establish his Age of Fire, he fought with a human army at his side, though their efforts would never be commemorated. There were ringed knights, armored in equipment forged in the abyss itself, with a dark sign seared into their breastplate to ensure that their dark soul was safely constrained. But the first wave to attack were always the slave knights. Disposable cannon fodder, clad in red and doomed to revive endlessly. They were good for exhausting the enemy in advance of the real attack. One of these lowly, downtrodden knights was named Gale. He fought and died without end, until one day, the fighting stopped. All his lords were gone. Gale wandered without purpose for who knows how long, until he finally stumbled into an old, musty painting, the painted world of Ariandel. He was not the first to mysteriously find himself here, and he would not be the last. This painting had a way of attracting forlorn souls without home or purpose. Who knows how long Gale spent inside this painting, wandering. But at some point, he met someone very special. A mysterious young crossbreed girl, a painter. He grew to care a great deal for the child and found new purpose in her service. She even came to call him uncle. The occupants of this painting had a tradition, he learned. They existed in a cycle of their own. When the painting they inhabit begins to rot, they put it to flame and create for themselves a new painted home. A new beginning. Gale found that thought appealing. A chance to leave the rot of a stagnating, cruel world behind and build something new, perhaps better. The painter girl desired to paint that new home, and he desired to see it done. But it would not be so easy a task. Another forlorn soul had found her way into the painted world around this time, an unkindled named Elfrida, one of the founders of some Londor church apparently. She had no desire to see her new home burned, and so she asserted control, assuming the name Lady Frida and presenting herself in a way that the painting's occupants found more familiar and comforting. She convinced the painting's creator to subdue the fire which would have been used to burn this little world away. She would have them embrace the rot, abandon this endless cycle. She even had her loyal knight, Wilhelm, lock the painter girl away, out of Gale's reach. But Gale was determined. With renewed purpose in mind, he ventured back out into the world. With scrap of the painted world in hand, he wandered again, searching for someone to help. Someone who could free his lady, the painter, and bring fire to this rotting world. After a long, disheartening search, he finally finds that someone. A wandering unkindled who doesn't know better than to touch a scrap of rotten painting when offered. We do achieve what Gale asks of us, though. We free the painter girl and confront Lady Frida, bringing long overdue fire to the painted world of Ariandel. But Gale is not waiting idle. Already he has set off to find the other essential component for his lady's work. She will need pigment, and Gale can think of no better source than the blood of the Dark Soul itself. If you're gonna paint a fresh start, you might as well go all out. And unlike most, Gale knows exactly where the blood of the Dark Soul resides. After conquering the dragons and establishing his Age of Fire, Gwyn was faced with a problem. What to do with these pygmies, these inheritors of the Dark Soul who might someday threaten his new kingdom? He needed them pacified, and preferably as far away as possible. So he gave to them a city, isolated at the edge of the world and surrounded by a high wall, the Ringed City. In addition, he left to the city his youngest daughter, Filianor, promising that he would return for her one day. Her slumber holds the city in a stasis, trapped in time. The world we've known is falling to pieces as we set out to find Gale. He's left us a clear trail, though. He knew we'd be following. We make our way down through the Dreg Heap's layers of ruined civilization. The remnants of Dark Souls 3's Lothric, Dark Souls 2's Earthen Peak, Dark Souls 1's Firelink Shrine, and are brought to the ancient Ringed City. Though a little overgrown, the place is still standing, still stuck in time, but not for much longer. We see no sign of Gale, but we do find Filianor, still sleeping in her chamber, still awaiting her father's return. It's hard to determine exactly what transpires when we stir her from her slumber, but the one thing we can be certain of is that the magic which locked the Ring City in time is broken. And the next thing we know, we are standing at the end of all things. Filianor is a long-dead husk. The Ringed City is no more. The kingdoms of old are buried. Nothing but ash and dust as far as the eye can see. And now, at last, we catch up to Gale. He had spent eternity pursuing pigment for his lady's painting. The pygmy lords of old contained the Dark Soul within them. He had hoped their blood would serve his lady's needs, but alas, that blood has dried over the ages. It was useless now. So instead, Gale has been consuming the pygmy lords himself, one by one, imbibing their dried blood and the Dark Soul with it, hoping that his own blood might then serve as a worthy substitute. Who knows how long he has been pursuing this quest. His equipment is half ruined, his body transforming, his mind warped. He attacks us for our portion of the Dark Soul on sight, but he did know we would come here. He likely knew that we would be the one to finally bring the blood of the Dark Soul back to his lady, and we do. Gale's mission is a success. The painted world of Ariandel burns, and the painter girl has the pigment she needs. She will paint a new world with this, a gentle one, a good home. It's a quiet, anticlimactic ending for this trilogy of games, but I do like it as a send-off. From Software has been working on this franchise for quite some time now, and I'm sure they're ready to move on to something new. To take all the experience and the knowledge they've accrued developing these games and start fresh with a clean canvas. The time has come to move on before rot has a chance to take hold. So it feels rather appropriate that our final action in this wonderful trilogy be to take hold of the Dark Soul itself and to use it to create a fresh new world. Whatever FromSoft decides to paint for us next, I can't wait to see it. Thanks for watching.